Good morning and welcome to Word of Faith Response. Thank you again for being with us today. I hope you're having a great day. And we have so enjoyed sharing with you all the wonderful things that Jesus has done for us. We have had members of the Word of Faith Fellowship coming on this program now for over 5 months, sharing with you all just how their lives have been totally changed by Jesus Christ. And so today I have Laura Bridges with me. Now, on Wednesday, we had Jim Bridges, her husband, and it was a wonderful testimony of how God changed his life. And if you did not hear that, you can go to our radio program and listen to his testimony. On our website, we have all of the radio programs that we have done in the past. Our website is wordoffaithfellowship.org. And when you go there, you'll see a link to radio programs, and you'll get to see her husband that was here, along with many, many other very encouraging testimonies. But today we're going to have Laura share with you how God has so changed her life. Laura has been in our church, the Word of Faith Fellowship, since 1989. She has 3 wonderful children and a great husband. And so she is actually a court reporter. She has her own business and travels and does a lot of court reporting for attorneys like myself and many, many other attorneys. And so let's go ahead and hear what Laura has to share with us today. Laura, go ahead.
Thank you. Good morning, Jim. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing me to come and share my testimony. I was born in Charlottesville, Virginia. My dad was going to medical school. I was a miracle baby because I was born 2 months early. I weighed 3 pounds and lost down to 2.5 inches. I was in an incubator for about 8 months. They weren't sure that I was going to live, but through the grace of God, I made it. I have a brother and a sister, an older sister and a younger brother. I was the middle child. My dad set up practice in Lynchburg, Virginia, which is where my family was from, and he started his practice there. My dad was a doctor. Both sets of my grandparents were doctors. I have a long line of doctors. My uncles and aunts were doctors and dentists and nurses. And so I grew up in a family that had very upstanding in the community, very well respected and well known. And I'm really grateful to God because my family did go to church. We did have some God-fearing in us. They took us to church every week. And I remember even growing up as a young child having a hunger for God and wanted to know Jesus. I remember going to bed at night and asking my father to tell me everything you can tell me about Jesus. And I'm so grateful to God that was in me. I remember even praying for, that Jesus would help me on my test in elementary school. But one big thing I remember when I was in ninth grade, we went to a Presbyterian church and they were getting ready to start Sunday school classes that they just did in the wintertime. And the teacher of the Sunday school class had gotten all the youth together and was asking everybody, what do you want to learn about? And people would get up and say, students would get up and say that they wanted to learn about political science in Sunday school, or they wanted to learn about current events. And I remember I stood up and said, I want to learn about Jesus. And the whole place got totally silent. You could hear a pin drop. And I remember going out in the car that day and telling my mom, I will never go back into that Sunday school class. I want to learn about Jesus. So I started going to her Sunday school class. And there was a whole season where my mom started really seeking God even more and wanted to know more about Jesus and learn more about him. And she started going to some non-denominational meetings that were even out of town, and she would take me with her because I was really interested, and we started learning more about the Bible and learning more about different things about the Spirit of God, and it helped me a lot. And then on in high school, I started really realizing that you can look good on the outside and you can put a smile on your face, but you can be totally tormented on the inside. And later I realized it really comes from not hearing God's voice and obeying. It can be, I wasn't a partier. I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I didn't do drugs, but I was tormented on the inside because I really didn't have Jesus. I didn't know him as my personal Savior. I did not come to that surrender where all I wanted was the will of God in my life, and I had really not received him and gotten born again. And so the torment was just there. I never felt like I really fit in, and I was really tormented. But towards I started seeking God, and in my senior year started inquiring of God, where should I go to school? I looked at some of the colleges in Virginia, and I didn't like the party lifestyle. I just didn't want to go there. And through the non-denominational meetings we had gone to, we had heard about a Bible school in Tulsa, Oklahoma, my mom and I. So my mom and I went to Tulsa and started looking at some of the schools there. We looked at a university, and I looked at a Bible school, and I really liked it. I wanted to learn about Jesus, and so during that time, my uncle happened to be up there going to some of the church services there in Tulsa, and he was living with a couple of young men who were going to that same Bible school that had taken him in because he had a lot of physical conditions, and were helping him get back and forth to that Bible school. Well, one of those young men happened to be about 6 years older than I was, but he became my first husband. During that time, while we were there looking at that Bible school, we would go visit my uncle, and we would have these two young men that were his roommates would have Bible studies and would talk about Jesus and would pray for people. And I mean, it really fascinated me. My first husband had an incredible testimony. He was a ex-convict. He was a convicted felon. He had been in prison. He was one of the first inmates that was in like a halfway house after he'd started coming out of prison that went to this Bible school. And it was just very fascinating to me, that God had done this in his life. He had done a lot of drugs growing up. He had a collapsed vein, from shooting drugs up so much. He had a marijuana leaf tattooed on his arm, and, but here was a young man that wanted God, and I was really amazed about it because I didn't find very many young men like that. So Mom and I went home, and I started feeling like that I was supposed to go to this Bible school after I graduated. And but this young man that I had met that ended up being my first husband kept calling me. He called me every day, and we started developing really a relationship over the phone, kind of dating over the phone. And I was 18, very young, and he came and visited us a couple months later in Lynchburg, Virginia. And he went back, and I remember one conversation we had. I felt like I was falling in love with him, and I remember one conversation he said that he felt like that God had told him that I was supposed to be his wife. Well, I felt like that too. So, and then he started talking to me. It would be great if we could get married before you go to this Bible school, because he was already second year in that Bible school. So I ended up, after I graduated in, I believe it was May of 1980, I ended up in August going to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and having a small wedding at his parents' house and getting married. Well, he delivered newspapers.
Let me ask you this. How old were you? So you got married right out of high school?
Yes.
How old were you?
I was 18. I was very naive and very gullible.
How many months did you know? So you graduate from high school, you go visit this Bible school, I assume right after you graduate from high school, and you're married in August. So how many months did you know him before you got married?
I think I only knew him maybe about 4 months.
Okay.
Right. And so we started delivering. He delivered newspapers in the middle of the night so he could go to this Bible school in the morning. So I started delivering newspapers too, and we delivered. First, I started with him, and then I started to have my own routes, and I delivered newspapers in the middle of the night. Sometimes, I'm so grateful nothing happened to me, because sometimes I would have a good car that worked. Sometimes I drove, trucks like F-150s and delivered newspapers in the middle of the night. But sometimes I would be in cars that were breaking down on the side of the road. I'd be so scared in the middle of the night at 2 and 3 in the morning. God, please don't let anything happen to me. I remember one time I broke down right in front of a house that I just threw the newspaper out to, and I had to go and knock on the door. And I'm like, "Hi, I'm your paper lady. Could you please help me? My car's broken down." This is before we had cell phones, and it was really very dangerous. I'm grateful nothing happened to me. But so as time went on, though, after getting married to him, I realized he really didn't know how to live right. We really weren't living right. And he had a lot of anger and rage, and I was not used to that. We did not have that in my family. He had a lot of control over me. He put me down a lot. He knew God better and knew what to do better, and his decisions were the best. He wouldn't listen to me. He could talk circles around me. He could quote scriptures all around me, and I just couldn't stand up to him. And so it was really an actually very abusive situation, and a lot of control, and I just kept feeling my heart get harder and harder. And then, we even had a ministry, and we went into prisons, and he would tell his testimony in there and pray for people, and we'd take people that did music, and we'd have a little praise and worship, and we would go to different prisons around Oklahoma probably once a month. But I was still so tormented. My heart kept getting harder and harder, and our marriage was not good. And I remember there was a whole season where there was something really didn't seem right. He wasn't coming home like he should. Like he should finish his route and come home, and he wasn't coming home. And he'd say, "I'm going to the store," and not come back for hours. I'm taking like 2 or 3 hours, and what is he doing? And I'd start questioning, "What are you doing?" And he would make up some excuse. And so there was one night where after we had finished, I'd finished my afternoon route, because I ended up having routes all during the night and then routes in the afternoon. And he didn't come home, and I was really concerned about it. He didn't come home, and I started getting really afraid. It was like 9 o'clock at night. It was dark, and all of a sudden I got this phone call, and it was an attorney, and he said, "Ma'am, your husband's been arrested. He's been charged with indecent exposure, and he is in jail right now." And I was like, "What? What?" I didn't even know what it was. I was so like shocked. And I remember this attorney saying, "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry." And I was just shook to the core. I wasn't around anybody that, went to jail or was arrested, growing up. And all of a sudden, my husband calls me from the jail wanting me to ask my parents for bond. I wasn't even sure what bond was. I mean, I was just devastated. I cried all night long, and he put a lot of pressure on me. "Don't you love me? Call your parents, call your parents." So I called my parents, and they graciously went his bond, so he got out. And he just talked his way around everything, And I even remember last night, Mark, which I had forgotten about, but a couple weeks later, we were at home and got a knock on the door, and there was another warrant out for his arrest, and the police came into our home, and he was handcuffed right in front of me and put into the car and taken back to jail again and got back out. But it was just devastating, just devastating. There's so much torment. And so we ended up having a trial, and he was found guilty, and he was put on probation. So, of course, that made life very rough, and he said he was changed, and I told him, "You ever do it again, you're going to go to prison." And he said, "I'll never do it again," and he said it would never happen again. So, in the meantime, we started doing some ministry of helps for an evangelist that was there in Oklahoma, and he started being part of their tape ministry. So I would go and see him at their office during the day. And I remember one winter day, I was all like 6 layers of clothes from delivering newspapers. I had, black ink on my fingers, and I walked in, and there was a girl there that started working for this ministry too, and her name was Brooke, and it was Brooke Covington, who she wasn't married then, but it was Brooke Covington. And I remember meeting her, and she was so sweet to me, and I from being, put down so much, I felt like I was just a ragamuffin. I was all like dirty, and she was just so sweet to me and just treated me like I was the best person. And I mean, I loved her from the beginning, and she became one of my very best friends, and to this day is one of my very best friends. And so we were working there in that evangelist and doing things like that. And then as time went on, he started acting strange again. And well, let me go back. So during this time, while I was going to Bible school, one of my professors was Sam Whaley, who was the pastor of our church now. And I remember hearing him preach, and he had such a heart for people. He would just start weeping and weeping about the people and caring for the people, and he was different than any of the other professors that were there. And I remember just loving him. And through Brooke and through Sam, I met his wife Jane Whaley, who is our pastor now, and she was the same way, just loved people. And they were so different than anybody else of the big name ministries out there in Tulsa. There were a lot of churches that had thousands of people and big name ministries, and you couldn't get to them, you couldn't get help, you couldn't really even talk to them. But Sam and Jane had their phone number in the phone book, and they were so accessible. They just wanted to help people. They weren't after a big name, they were out to help people. And they're still that same way today. They're just wanting to help people and help people, make it in Jesus. So But I ended up telling Brooke what had happened because I was just so tormented with what had happened, that he had been charged with indecent exposure and everything that went with it, all the control and the putting down and using the name of Jesus to get his own way. And she was the first person beside my parents that I told. And she just started, helping me and reaching out to me and praying for me. And I mean, I'm so grateful to her because I just didn't know how I was going to make it. And then time went on, and it was after, let's see, Sam and Jane and Brooke ended up coming back to North Carolina where Sam and Jane had previously started a church. So they came back here and to continue pastoring that church, and I stayed back and stayed with my husband, and life got really even worse. And he was not acting right. His lifestyle wasn't right. We weren't acting right. There was so much strife in our home and so much control. And then one day, I get another call, and he was charged with indecent exposure again. And I remember my ears started ringing. I went black. I thought I was going to I almost totally blacked out, and I did not know how I was ever going to function again. And I was just crying all over the place. He was telling me again, call your parents, call your parents. If you love me, you call your parents. I didn't want to call him. I called him and I said, I don't really want to call you and ask you this, but this has happened again. They did not go the bond, which I was so grateful, but he ended up getting a bondsman, and he got back out. And it was just very, very hard. My heart had gotten so hard from just not living right, not hearing God's voice and obeying, and just doing things that I knew were wrong and doing it anyway. And I remember delivering those newspapers in the middle of the night and just start crying out to God, God, please help me. I am so dead on the inside. I am so dead. I am a dead woman. And all that's going to happen now is my body is going to decay. I'm just waiting for my body to decay. God, please, I've got to know you. There's got to be more than the way I'm living. There's got to be more of you, Jesus. And that way I'd be out in the woods delivering these newspapers. We were delivering so many different types of newspapers to make more money. And I was getting 2.5 hours of sleep a night. I was unkept. I could hardly function. And I would just remember just wailing out to God and crying out to God, please change my heart. God, my heart is in a prison. I've changed my heart. God, my heart is in a prison. Please change me. Just wailing out to God. And God is just so faithful. But during the end of that year, I believe it was in the wintertime, my parents came just to give me moral support and be with me. At that time, I was driving a old station wagon that had no window in the back. I was cuddled up in blankets, try to stay warm and deliver these newspapers. We had I had one headlight. I would, the snow would be coming in the back, and I'd be throwing windows out this side, and my brakes were going out. I remember I have to stop way, way far back if I got to a stoplight, and then half the time I have to hit up against the curb to totally stop the car, and it was just very dangerous. And my dad rented a car when he came there and just rode with me in the middle of the night, and my dad told me later, he said, when I came to Tulsa and I saw you, what had happened to you, he started crying and said, what has happened to my little girl? I was like a mummy. I had no feeling anymore. I didn't care about anything, and that was not me. I could not even smile. I was never like that. I was mad. I was mad at God, mad at myself, mad at the world, mad at my husband. I hated life. I didn't know what there was to live for. I mean, it was awful. My brother and sister came. They were so concerned about me. They were writing scriptures down on index cards, trying to get me to read them and just trying to get some sort of life in me.
So you would have been in your early 20s at this time?
Yes, about 26, 27 by then.
Okay, and at this time was your husband out on bond for the second charge, waiting for the trial or the court date, and you're still out here with him delivering these newspapers. Your parents come to see you.
Yes, yes, and my mom and dad, they never told me to leave him. They knew if they said anything wrong about him, because I just lived under so much of that control. If they said anything bad about him, I would just get mad at them. And I remember right before they left, though, God started saying to me, you better flee. You better run for your life. If you don't run for your life, you're going to die. So I told my dad, God said, you better run for your life or you're going to die, because I was a dead person on the inside. I could not hardly function. And and I remember in the middle of the night after delivering newspapers, I came into the house and I got my makeup, I got my pillow, I got my Bible, and I got my purse. And I ran for my life, and I went with my parents, and we flew into Atlanta. And I did not tell him. I knew if I told him, he would talk me out of it. I always came under all his manipulation, and I couldn't stand up for what was right. And so I came to Atlanta first, because that's where my sister was. And he kept trying to call. He was trying to call back in Virginia where my parents were. He was calling, and I would not talk to him. I knew if I did, I would not make it. And so I ended up going to my family's, my mom and dad's house, and staying with them, and just start really seeking God and turning my heart to God, and asking him to change my life. And I remember God kept dealing with me with certain areas of my life. I remember sitting there watching TV, and he was telling me, what are you doing? What are you doing watching that TV? If you want me to set you free, truth will set you free. All you're listening to is a bunch of junk. It's all a bunch of lies. It's false, fake shows, a bunch of sin all over there. And I'd be so convicted. I'd be so convicted. But I was addicted to TV. And so I'd get up and walk away. And then sometimes I'd sit back down and just get all. And he would say, what are you doing? Don't you want to be set free? The truth is going to set you free. And then I get back, getting up and leaving and doing what I was trying to hear what God was wanting me to do next. And then there was a whole time where God was dealing with me with ungodly music, because I listened to a lot of ungodly music, and I just would listen to a cassette tape, and all of a sudden I hear God say, what are you doing listening to that? That's not me. That's not me doing that. And I would just throw that one away. Then I would be listening to other stuff, and it would be fine one day, and one day God would say, you better throw that one away. That's not bringing you to Jesus. And I mean, he just kept bringing me to him and bringing to him, and more life came. And I remember crying out to God, I want to go to the place where you've called me to be, so I can grow, and I can grow in you. And God, and during this time, I had kept in contact with Brooke and let her know what had happened. Anytime I need help, I knew I could always call Brooke, and she would help me. And I remember feeling like I wanted to go to North Carolina, and I started coming on weekends and coming to the Word of Faith Fellowship here in Spindale, and coming in on weekends, and God's changing my heart. And I remember coming back to Lynchburg and telling my Dad, he asked me, what's going on? I said, well, I think it's time for me to move to Rutherfordton. And he said, I just told your mom, you're not going to be happy till you move there. And so he helped me move there. In 1989, I moved here, and God really started doing a work in me. I started crying out to Jesus to work a submission in me that I can obey him. And one thing I just love about Sam and Jane, they lay down their life for people so they can serve God. And I would go to Jane Whaley and try to get her to tell me what to do, whether it was about a job or any kind of situation I have, and she would not tell me what to do. She would say, you're going to seek God, you're going to know God, you ask Jesus, and Jesus is going to tell you, and you'll obey him. And that was so good for me, because from coming out from underneath that control that I was with my first husband, that I couldn't hear God as well as him. He was always right, I was always wrong. It made me start having a relationship with Jesus myself. And I so appreciate that about her. And one of the biggest things from being in the scriptures that were coming out of the pulpit and coming here and starting to really learn Jesus and getting in the scriptures and learning how to live and how to walk with God. And because my emotions had been up and down so much that I didn't know how to be stable. And God started teaching me you can submit to God and resist that devil, and that devil can go. You don't have to be tormented. You can submit your heart to God, and you don't have to be tormented. And one of the biggest areas that God really began to deal with me was the bitterness I had towards my first husband. I mean, I hated him. And the Bible says if you hate your brother, you're a murderer. But nobody could talk to me about him. I would get mad. I would start crying all over the place. You don't know what he did with me to me. You don't know what he did to me, and nobody could talk to me about that.
Did he actually, and
Yes,
change
sir.
the subject a little bit, did he actually end up going to prison that second time?
Yes, he ended up being convicted and going to prison for 18 months. And so God was really dealing with me, and he told me, you're not going to grow in me the right way if you do not deal with this bitterness. It's going to dwarf you. And I would just be laying in my bed and crying out to God, God, please help me, change my heart, make me, the right, make me right on the inside. I want to have a pure heart. Only the pure are going to see you. But my mind would start going, everything he did to me, everything he did to me. I mean, it was just, anytime I heard his name, it was like a knife, and he did this to me, and he did this to me. I was the victim, and he did this. And all of a sudden, the Spirit of God said to me, what about you and your sin? And I'm telling you, I hit my knees. I literally got beside my bed and got on my knees and put my head on the bed and started repenting. God, please forgive me for my sin, because there were so many things I did that was wrong, that I knew was wrong, and I did it anyway. I went against all my convictions. He was accountable to God for his sin, but I was accountable for my sin, and I wasn't going to blame him anymore. It was me, my relationship with God, and that was one of the biggest deliverances I ever had. And I remember, God, who will deliver me? Like in Romans, I just started praying, God, who will deliver me from this body of death? Oh, thank God, he will. And the deliverance just started coming to me. And I mean, the freedom that started coming, I started to feel my heart again. I remember before I actually came here, when I first had left Tulsa, my heart was so hard, I couldn't even feel God. I really didn't even want him. And I started saying, God, I don't even want you, but please make me want you. And I made myself say it every day. I felt so stupid, but I made myself say it every day. And I started feeling the desire for Jesus to come into my heart. And it just kept coming in my heart that that's all I wanted, that the only reason to live was Jesus. And that's all that mattered, that to have your heart surrendered and submitted to God, that's all that mattered. And so, as God kept dealing with me, I had this wound in there from all the hurt and all the sin and everything that had happened, and I thought I would just have to live with this forever. But coming here, God just started teaching me you can trust God. God will help you, and he will save you, and he will deliver you. And I remember another time in our sanctuary when I was crying out to God, and God changed my heart. God, I don't want this wounding in me, and I don't want to be like a wounded animal. And I remember God coming in and bringing all this healing to me from all this hurt, to where now it's like it never happened. I mean, even getting ready for this testimony today, I had to really go back and think what did happen to me and how devastated I was, because it's like it never happened. I'm a new person. I'm a different person. I'm not the same person I was. I have a happy life. God has restored every single thing to me that the devil had stolen from me. I mean, everything. I don't want to build my own life, because I knew what happened when I built my own life. I want my life to be built by God and what Jesus says. And when you do that, life is happy. He brings the perfect thing to you. He brought me the perfect husband. There was a gentle man, and I needed that. He brought wonderful children that are such a blessing that God has brought to us, and everything that he's brought to me has been for a happy path.
And what a powerful testimony, Laura. I'm so glad that you just shared out of your heart about God delivering you from that bitterness, and what an amazing testimony. You end up in a relationship, in a marriage, when you're really young, and you just jump right into this thing, and as you go through that, you see that this relationship is not working out. You look back now, I'm sure you can see, well, yes, God didn't have you do these things,
right,
but
God did not have me.
But yet, now you can say that there's nothing in your heart that's bitterness. You forgive, you love, you take
yes,
accountability for your life.
Absolutely.
And there's no bitterness. And I just know that there may be people out there that are listening that maybe had other relationships that did not work out, and people did things to them, but you're right, God can set you free from bitterness. And what a miracle. And what I love to see is how God has restored your life. Your husband was on here. You've got one of the nicest,
yes,
kindest, gentlest men that I know of, and
yes,
then you have 3 wonderful children. God restored your life as
He
you
did.
just cried out to him.
He did.
Just, God, I want to be free. I want to know you. And I just love when you were sharing about how God changed your desires. You had that hardness from the hurt, and so many times when we go down paths that God didn't lead us, or things happen to us, and we close our heart to God, yet God came to you and he helped you to come out,
yes,
to open your heart back to him.
Yes.
Out of his love, he kept bringing you out, and so now God's done that work in your
yes,
heart where you love God.
yes,
And what a wonderful testimony that you shared, and I appreciate you sharing
yes,
that with us, and we appreciate you listeners listening. Again, this is Word of Faith Responds. We have this program Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, 8:30 to 9. I hope you have a wonderful day.